Do you know what it's like to walk in the pleasure of God? Do you know what it's like to have that glorious, glorious sense that God is pleased with you and that you are so wrapped up in Him that nothing else matters? And whatever comes your way, you know you can handle it, because walking in the presence of God is experiencing the power of God. There was a time in the history of Israel when they really sensed the manifest presence of God. They watched God go before them. They watched God protect them. But now something's changed in Israel's history. Now they're living in the prosperous days of Uzziah. Now they have turned away from God in their prosperity and in their pride, and they've lifted themselves up. They have forgotten about holiness. They're having parties and they're drinking, and drink has so overcome them that many of them are waking, and the first thing in the morning, what they need is a good old drink. And what they want at night is another drink and another drink and another drink as they party. The women are caught up in themselves. They walk around projecting their sexuality, showing their good-looking clothes and the tinkling of the bracelets on their hands and on their feet, and they walk with mincing steps. It's sad, really. This is a people who live in the presence of God. His Shekinah glory is there over the temple. They can see the cloud by day. They can see the pillar of fire by night. And yet they are against the Lord. They're against the Lord by their actions. They're against the Lord by their words. Listen to what Isaiah chapter 3 says. In Isaiah chapter 3, he says in verse 8, "For Jerusalem has stumbled, Judah has fallen, because their speech and their actions are against the Lord, to rebel against His glorious presence." The expression on their faces bears witness against them. They display their sin like Sodom. They do not even conceal it. Woe to them, for they have brought, listen carefully, evil upon themselves. Say to the righteous, it will go well with them, for they will eat the fruit of their actions. But woe to the wicked, it will go badly for him, for what he deserves will be done to him. Not all in Jerusalem were rebelling against God. There was a righteous remnant. There was a group that feared God. There was a group that looked to that Temple Mount and saw that cloud by day, saw that pillar of fire by night, and knew that in Him they lived and moved and had their being. And yet they were caught up in the midst of what it says in Philippians chapter 2, a crooked and perverse generation. So God is going to do something. God is going to remove from them His manifest presence. This will be the first time in their history since they left the land of Egypt. What I want us to do is I want us to look at several scriptures. Let's look at some scriptures. Exodus chapter 13 is where I want you to begin. And what I want you to see is that these people had experienced the manifest presence of God. In Exodus chapter 13, in verse 21, we read, "The Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night." He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. In other words, as they journeyed through that wilderness, as they left Egypt, the land where they had been in bondage, after they left the dominion of Pharaoh, where they had been slaves, now they are following God, and they know that it is God. And they know that His manifest presence is with them, and wherever they go, here is the one who delivered them from the power of all of Egypt and drowned Pharaoh and his Egyptian army in the sea. Here is this God going before them, and He does not leave them. And you say, well, what's the parallel? The parallel is you don't have a pillar of cloud. You don't have a pillar of fire. You have the very Spirit of God living inside of you. Every single Christian, every single believer has been immersed, identified with, united with the Holy Spirit of God. You were sealed by the Spirit of God until the day of your redemption. Hebrews says He will never leave you nor forsake you, so that you can boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear what man will do unto me. You say, well then, why sweat it? I can live any way I want and know that God is with me. Oh no. If that's your attitude, I wonder if God has ever revealed Himself to you as He really is, and if you've ever really believed. Because if you are a true child of God, there is a hunger, there is a thirst for righteousness. Remember, among these children of Israel, there were those that were righteous. So now watch. I want you to go from there to Exodus chapter 40. In Exodus chapter 40. Now, what happens in Exodus chapter 40 is they build the tabernacle. And when they finish building the tabernacle, when they get all the furniture and everything ready, chapter 4 tells you how it is all put into place. And as you read chapter 4, it says in chapter 40, in verse 17, now in the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. And it says in verse 19, he spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent on top of it, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. That is a key repeated phrase from this point on to the end of the chapter. Moses did just as the Lord commanded him. And he's erecting this tabernacle. Now watch what it says in verse 29. And he set the altar of burnt offering. I want you to remember that for when we get into Isaiah 6. Before the doorway of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and offered on it the burnt offering and the meal offering, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. They erect it, they offer the sacrifice. The coals on the altar of burnt offering are burning up the sacrifice. And then you come down to verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord was ever present in that tabernacle. And he goes on to say this, Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it. The cloud, I want you to remember that. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God was there in his manifest presence throughout all their journeys. Wherever the cloud was taken up off of the tabernacle, the sons of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out until the day that it was taken up. They stopped. They rested. But then when they saw the cloud move, then it was time to get up. And when they got up, then they began to follow God. It was the presence of God with them. Now, look at verse 38. For throughout all their journeys, the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and there was fire in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel. 1 Kings chapter 8. And this is very important, and you'll see and appreciate it even more when we get to Isaiah chapter 6. But in 1 Kings chapter 8, in verse 10, it says, and Solomon has built the temple now. They have made the sacrifices. And it says, and it happened that when the priests came from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house. The glory of the Lord filled the house. They could not stand. God's presence was there. But then something happens, and His presence is taken away. Why? Because He's a holy God, because He's a righteous God, because His holiness and His righteousness demand that sin be judged.